Alrighty, well, so in October 2023, Elon Musk told Joe Rogan that he bought Twitter to save it from the woke mind virus. What the heck is he talking about? A mind virus? What even is that? Some right-wing fever dream boogeyman? What has Elon been smoking? Well, today I want to talk to you about viruses in general and mind viruses in particular. What I'm not going to talk to you today about is wokeness. Let's get right into it. So, what is a mind virus? What is a virus, first of all? Viruses are extremely tiny, submicroscopic biological particles made up of strands of RNA or DNA inside a protein coat. They can only replicate with the help of a host cell that they infect. In contrast to bacteria, fungi, and other microorganisms that take in nutrients from their surroundings, power on metabolism, excrete outputs, and divide to reproduce, viruses do none of those things. Viruses do not have their own metabolism, and they cannot naturally reproduce outside a host cell. Are all viruses bad? I found an article about the good that viruses do in the spring 2022 edition of the Harvard Medical Magazine. As the author Stephanie Dutchin writes, #NotAllViruses. Although some 200 kinds of viruses are known to infect, sicken, or kill us, as the emergence of SARS-CoV-2 has most recently hammered home, that's only one part of the picture. Viruses also keep us alive. They form a part of our body's microbiome, and they safeguard our health. Despite the devastating effects of viral diseases, the viruses that count most in our lives are crucial, not in disease, but in health, in all aspects of life, says Eugene Koonin. Koonin is an expert on the genetics of evolution and viruses at the NIH's National Center for Biotechnology Information. One group of researchers is interested in viruses that infect humans without causing disease, and then fend off more dangerous viruses and bacteria. GB virus C, an asymptomatic bloodborne virus, slows progression to AIDS in people with HIV and lowers the risk that an infection with Ebola virus will prove deadly. Mouse studies suggest that certain innocuous herpes viruses and cytomegaloviruses prevent infection by Listeria and Yersinia pestis, which causes the bubonic plague. Even harmful viruses can harbor disease-combating strategies for scientists to adapt. The hepatitis A virus can protect against hepatitis C, and researchers have used lymphoma-associated viruses to cure type 1 diabetes in mice. Other viruses go deeper. They don't just inject free-floating genetic material into the cell nuclei they infect, but actually integrate their genes into a host cell's DNA. Every so often, in the far recesses of history, as humans and our evolutionary forebears evolved, a retrovirus infected an egg or sperm cell. That cell became a fertilized embryo that developed to term, with viral DNA incorporated everywhere. And the resulting offspring went on to have offspring of their own, passing the DNA through subsequent generations. According to Koonin, about 50% of our genome once belonged to viruses and related mobile genetic elements. Most of the viral gene remnants, or endogenous retroviruses, studied so far, have proven either inert or latent, lurking until they reawaken and contribute to disease. An unknown number, however, were evolutionarily repurposed for our benefit. Mounting evidence suggests that endogenous retroviruses spurred the rise of placental mammals. Genes derived from viruses make proteins that form a foundational layer in the placenta and regulate a hormone that controls birth timing in primates. An article in Discover magazine elaborates. Before this adaptation, animals used eggshells to wall off offspring from the mother's own trigger-happy immune system. Otherwise, a fetus would be gobbled up by white blood cells. But syncytin allows our genes to build a barrier between fetus and mother, while still allowing the exchange of nutrients. In short, we owe some of the fundamental principles of human evolution to viruses. Back to the article in Harvard Medical Magazine. From the origins of life to technologies that preserve it, learning about viruses can transform people's opinions on what once seemed like straightforward agents of disease and death. When I hear the word virus, I'm not scared anymore, says Mohammed Sharif Tebeboard-Bar. I ask, okay, what type of virus? What does it do? What are the implications? So, what is a mind virus? This comes from Richard Dawkins' incredible book, The Selfish Gene, Chapter 11, about a kind of new replicator. Contrary to how the title sounds, and Dawkins laments in the preface to the 30th anniversary edition how many of his critics prefer to read a book by title only, skipping the large footnote of the entire book itself. Contrary to how the title sounds, it's not a book about having found a gene for selfishness, and it's not advocating for selfishness, but rather it's about how it's the gene that's the thing that is selfish. It's the gene that's the unit that's selected for in Darwinian evolution by natural selection. Dawkins writes, as an enthusiastic Darwinian, I have been dissatisfied with explanations that my fellow enthusiasts have offered for human behavior. They've tried to look for biological advantages in various attributes of human civilization. These ideas are plausible as far as they go, but I find that they do not begin to square up to the formidable challenge of explaining culture, cultural evolution, and the immense differences between human cultures around the world. From the utter selfishness of the Ik of Uganda, as described by Colin Turnbull, to the gentle altruism of the Arapesh, as described by Margaret Mead. I think we have got to start again, to go right back to first principles. The argument I shall advance, surprising as it may seem coming from the author of the earlier chapters, is that for an understanding of the evolution of modern man, we must begin by throwing out the gene as the sole basis of our ideas on evolution. I am an enthusiastic Darwinian, but I think Darwinism is too big a theory to be confined to the narrow context of the gene. The gene will enter my thesis as an analogy, nothing more. What, after all, is so special about genes? The answer is that they are replicators. The laws of physics are supposed to be true all over the accessible universe. Are there any principles of biology that are likely to have similar universal validity? When astronauts voyage to distant planets and look for life, they can expect to find creatures too strange and unearthly for us to imagine. But is there anything that must be true of all life, wherever it is found, and whatever the basis of its chemistry? If forms of life exist whose chemistry is based on silicon rather than carbon, or ammonia rather than water, if creatures are discovered that boil to death at minus 100 degrees centigrade, if a form of life is found that is not based on chemistry at all, but on electronic reverberating circuits, will there still be any general principle that is true of all life? Obviously, I do not know, but if I had to bet, I would put my money on one fundamental principle. This is the law that all life evolves by a differential survival of replicating entities. As Daniel Dennett writes in Breaking the Spell, Religions as a Natural Phenomenon, Appendix A, evolution will occur wherever and whenever three conditions are met. 1, replication. 2, variation, that is mutation. 3, differential fitness, that is competition. In Darwin's own terms, if there is descent with modification and a severe struggle for life, better equipped descendants will prosper at the expense of the competition. Back to Dawkins. But do we have to go to distant worlds to find other kinds of replicator and other consequent kinds of evolution? I think that a new kind of replicator has recently emerged on this very planet. It's staring us in the face. It's still in its infancy, still drifting clumsily about in its primeval soup, but already it is achieving evolutionary change at a rate that leaves the old gene panting far behind. The new soup is the soup of human culture. We need a name for the new replicator, a noun that conveys the idea of a unit of cultural transmission, or a unit of imitation. Mimeme, or mimeme, I don't know, comes from a suitable Greek root. But I want a monosyllable that sounds a bit like gene. I hope my classicist friends will forgive me if I abbreviate mimeme to meme. If it is any consolation, it could alternatively be thought of as related to memory, or to the French word meme. It should be pronounced to rhyme with cream. I just want to pause for a moment and appreciate the significance of what we've just witnessed here. We've just witnessed the birth of the meme. Wait, that's not quite right. We've just witnessed the birth of the meme of the meme. Richard Dawkins coined the term meme in 1976. Let us marvel at this, for it is indeed marvelous. Okay, back to Dawkins. Examples of memes are tunes, ideas, catchphrases, clothes fashions, ways of making pots or of building arches. Just as genes propagate themselves in the gene pool by leaping from body to body via sperms or eggs, so memes propagate themselves in the meme pool by leaping from brain to brain via a process which, in the broad sense, can be called imitation. If a scientist hears or reads about a good idea, they pass it on to their colleagues and students. They mention it in their articles and their lectures. If the idea catches on, it can be said to propagate itself, spreading from brain to brain. As my colleague N.K. Humphrey neatly summed up in an earlier draft of this chapter, memes should be regarded as living structures, not just metaphorically, but technically. When you plant a fertile meme in my mind, you literally parasitize my brain, turning it into a vehicle for the meme's propagation in just the way that a virus may parasitize the genetic mechanism of a host cell. And this isn't just a way of talking. The meme for, say, belief in life after death is actually realized physically, millions of times over, as a structure in the nervous system of individual humans the world over. Consider the idea of God. We do not know how it arose in the meme pool. Probably it originated many times by independent mutation. In any case, it is very old indeed. How does it replicate itself? By spoken and written word, aided by great music and great art. Why does it have such a high survival value? Remember that survival value here does not mean value for a gene in a gene pool, but value for a meme in a meme pool. The question really means, what is it about the idea of a god that gives it its stability and penetrance in the cultural environment? The survival value of the god meme in the meme pool results from its great psychological appeal. It provides a superficially plausible answer to deep and troubling questions about existence. It suggests that injustices in this world may be rectified in the next. The everlasting arms hold out a cushion against our own inadequacies, which, like a doctor's placebo, is nonetheless effective for being imaginary. These are some of the reasons why the idea of God is copied so readily by successive generations of individual brains. God exists, if only in the form of a meme with high survival value, or an effective power, in the environment provided by human culture. Let us pursue the analogy between memes and genes further. Throughout this book, I have emphasized that we must not think of genes as conscious, purposeful agents. Blind natural selection, however, makes them behave rather as if they were purposeful, and it has been convenient as a shorthand to refer to genes in the language of purpose. For example, when we say, genes are trying to increase their numbers in future gene pools, what we really mean is, those genes that behave in such a way as to increase their numbers in future gene pools tend to be genes whose effects we see in the world. Just as we have found it convenient to think of genes as active agents working purposefully for their own survival, perhaps it might be convenient to think of memes in the same way. In neither case must we get mystical about it. In both cases, the idea of purpose is only a metaphor. But we have already seen what a fruitful metaphor it is in the case of genes. We have even used words like selfish and ruthless of genes, knowing full well it is only a figure of speech. Can we, in exactly the same spirit, look for selfish or ruthless memes? The answer is that we might, because there is a sense in which they must indulge in a kind of competition with each other. In human brains, time is possibly a more important limiting factor than storage space, and it is the subject of heavy competition. The human brain and the body that it controls cannot do more than one or a few things at once. If a meme is to dominate the attention of a human brain, it must do so at the expense of rival memes. Other commodities for which memes compete are radio and television time, billboard space, newspaper column inches, and library shelf space. In the case of genes, we saw in earlier chapters that co-adapted gene complexes may arise in the gene pool. A large set of genes concerned with mimicry in butterflies become tightly linked together on the same chromosome, so tightly that they can be treated as one gene. We also met the more sophisticated idea of the evolutionarily stable set of genes. Mutually suitable teeth, claws, guts, and sense organs evolved in carnivore gene pools, while a different set of stable characteristics emerged in herbivore gene pools. Does anything analogous occur in meme pools? Has the God meme, say, become associated with any other particular memes? And does this association assist the survival of each of the participating memes? To take a particular example, an aspect of the doctrine that has been very effective in enforcing religious observance is the threat of hellfire. Many children, and even some adults, believe that they will suffer ghastly torments after death if they do not obey the priestly rules. This is a particularly nasty technique of persuasion, causing great psychological anguish throughout the Middle Ages and even today. But it is highly effective. It might almost have been planned deliberately by a Machiavellian priesthood trained in deep psychological indoctrination techniques. However, I doubt if the priests were that clever. Much more probably, unconscious memes have ensured their own survival by virtue of those same qualities of pseudo-ruthlessness that successful genes display. The idea of hellfire is quite simply self-perpetuating because of its own deep psychological impact. It has become linked to the God meme because the two reinforce each other and assist each other's survival in the meme pool. Another member of the religious meme complex is called faith. It means blind trust in the absence of evidence, even in the teeth of evidence. The story of doubting Thomas is told not so that we shall admire Thomas, but so that we can admire the other apostles in comparison. Thomas demanded evidence. Nothing is more lethal for certain kinds of memes than a tendency to look for evidence. The other apostles, whose faith was so strong that they did not need evidence, are held up to us as worthy of imitation. The meme for blind faith secures its own perpetuation by the simple unconscious expedient of discouraging rational inquiry. Blind faith can justify anything. If a man believes in a different God, or even if he uses a different ritual for worshiping the same God, blind faith can decree that he should die. On the cross, at the stake, skewered on a crusader's sword, shot in a Beirut street, or blown up in a bar in Belfast. Memes for blind faith have their own ruthless ways of propagating themselves. This is true of patriotic and political, as well as religious blind faith. Dennett also writes about some defensive adaptations that meme complexes have taken on over time that help them resist being dislodged by other memes competing for brain space and brain time. These come from Chapter 8 of Breaking the Spell, titled Belief in Belief. The stewardship of religious ideas creates a powerful phenomenon, belief in belief, which radically transforms the content of the underlying beliefs, making rational investigation of them difficult, if not impossible. Consider an example that is potent today. Because many of us believe in democracy and recognize that the security of democracy in the future depends critically on maintaining the belief in democracy, we are eager to quote, and quote, and quote Winston Churchill's famous line, "Democracy is the worst form of government, except all the other forms that have been tried." As stewards of democracy, we are often conflicted, eager to point out flaws that have been that ought to be repaired, yet just as eager to reassure people that the flaws aren't that bad, that democracy can police itself, so their faith in it is not misplaced. What do people do when they discover that they no longer believe in God? Some of them don't do anything. They don't stop going to church, and they don't even tell their loved ones. They just quietly get on with their lives, living as morally or immorally as they did before. Others feel the need to cast about for a religious creed that they can endorse with a straight face. They have a firm belief that belief in God is something to preserve. So when they find the traditional concepts of God frankly incredible, they don't give up. They seek a substitute. And the search, once again, need not be at all conscious and deliberate. Without ever being frankly aware that a cherished ideal is endangered in some way, people may be strongly moved by a nameless dread, the sinking sense of a loss of conviction, a threat intuited but not articulated that needs to be countered vigorously. This puts them in a state of mind that makes them particularly receptive to novel emphases that somehow seem right or fitting. Like sausage making and the crafting of legislation in a democracy, creed revision is a process that is upsetting to watch too closely. So it is no wonder that a fog of mystery descends so gracefully over it. A further adaptation that has been grafted onto this meme complex is it is impolite to ask about these matters. If you persist, you're likely to get a response along these lines. God can see you when you're doing something evil in the dark, but he does not have eyelids and he never blinks, you silly, rude person. And of course, he can read your mind even when you are careful not to talk to yourself, but he still prefers you pray to him in words, and don't ask me how or why. These are mysteries we finite mortals will never understand. People of all faiths have been taught that any such questioning is somehow insulting or demeaning to their faith, and must be an attempt to ridicule their views. What a fine protective sheen this virus provides, permitting it to shed the antibodies of skepticism effortlessly. But it doesn't always work. And when the skepticism becomes more threatening, stronger measures can be invoked. One of the most effective is also one of the most transparent, the old diabolical lie. The term comes from de Rougemont in 1944, who speaks of the putative proclivity of the father of lies for appearing as his own opposite. It is almost literally a trick with mirrors. And like many good magic tricks, it's so simple that it's hard to believe it could ever work. Novice magicians often have to steel themselves to perform tricks the first time in public. It just doesn't seem possible that audiences will fall for these, but they do. If I were designing a phony religion, I'd surely include a version of this little gem, but I'd have a hard time saying it with a straight face. If anyone ever raises questions or objections about our religion that you cannot answer, that person is almost certainly Satan. In fact, the more reasonable the person is, the more eager to engage you in open-minded and congenial discussion, the more sure you can be that you're talking to Satan in disguise. Turn away. Do not listen. It's a trap. What is particularly cute about this trick is that it's a perfect wild card. So lacking in content that any sect or creed or conspiracy can use it effectively. Communist cells can be warned that any criticism they encounter is almost sure to be the work of FBI infiltrators in disguise. And radical feminist discussion groups can squelch any unanswerable criticism by declaring it to be phallocentric propaganda being unwittingly spread by a brainwashed dupe of the evil patriarchy, and so forth. This all-purpose loyalty enforcer is paranoia in a pill, sure to keep the critics muted, if not silent. Did anyone invent this brilliant adaptation? Or is it a wild meme that domesticated itself by attaching itself to whatever memes were competing for hosts in its neighborhood? Nobody knows. But now it's available for anyone to use. Although, if this book has any success, its virulence should diminish as people begin to recognize it for what it is. Let's wind down by returning to Dawkins. Dawkins closes the chapter on memes on a note of qualified hope. One unique feature of humans, which may or may not have evolved mimetically, is their capacity for conscious foresight. Selfish genes, and if you allow the speculation of this chapter, memes too, have no foresight. They are unconscious, blind replicators. The fact that they replicate, together with certain further conditions, means that they will tend, willy-nilly, towards the evolution of qualities which, in the special sense of this book, can be called selfish. However, even if we look on the dark side and assume that individual humans are fundamentally selfish, our conscious foresight, our capacity to simulate the future in imagination, could save us from the worst selfish excesses of the blind replicators. We have at least the mental equipment to foster our long-term selfish interests, rather than merely our short-term selfish interests. We can see the long-term benefits of participating in what Dawkins described in an earlier chapter as a conspiracy of doves. And we can sit down together to discuss ways of making the conspiracy work. We have the power to defy the selfish genes of our birth, and if necessary, selfish memes of our indoctrination. We can even discuss ways of deliberately cultivating and nurturing pure, disinterested altruism, something that has no place in nature. We are built as gene machines and cultured as meme machines, but we have the power to turn against our creators. We, alone on Earth, can rebel against the tyranny of the selfish replicators.